The introductions are always very nice, and this is the best introduction I have had in a long time. So thank you, Thomas. So let's start with trying to understand what's happening in terms of death and dying. And I want to say that this is not just a technical perspective, it's rather a personal perspective with some technology included as a part of what I do and what I'm involved in. So this is a bad time for the world, and as you are all very much aware, this is what we face in the newspapers and news every day. So it's amazing that this is going on, and I can't say what's happening on your end of the world, but on this end of the world, a great many people are tremendously frustrated at the very slow pace of action that this administration has taken. But it's probably better than what the last administration could have done. So, and here are also disturbing facts from your part of the world. I don't need to read it out. You can see the illustration and you can read what I wrote. So let me go back to the beginning and start with the topic dying and death. So I read a book about dying and death when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it was with my dad, who was a philosopher in some sense. And the book, I was absolutely stunned to find that the book from 1944 is actually available on Amazon. So this book is not about really ideas of ghosts and goblins. This is much more a look at what people think about life beyond death. So I remember some parts of it, and when Thomas asked me to talk about it, this was one of the first things that crossed my mind. And very recently, in March, my father-in-law passed away. And his passing away and Thomas's request for me to speak on this topic brought up a lot of things, and that's why this is a bit more of a personal perspective, and all of you are encouraged to ask questions. If you have any questions relevant to the personal perspectives, please feel free to ask. There is nothing off limits. So this is a friend, Atul, and Atul, you can read about him as I've said. You can Google everybody. So Atul is a very well-known surgeon as well as a writer. And Atul's book, Being Mortal, is kind of refreshing from the perspective that it talks about the realities as we near death and the people around us. And at my age, I am also nearing an exit of some sort. I think it makes a lot of sense to at least reflect on what's happening. I have been reflecting about this thing for a very, very long time for reasons that might come clear to you in a minute. But if you have a chance, take a look at this book. And for the young people in the room, please don't. You don't need to worry about it. For the old people in the room, please do. It might help you. So, during life, Atul's book is about death, but what happens during life? So this is a book, and this is for especially for all the young people in the room. This is a book by Bernard Lowen, a friend and a scientist, an inventor of variety of things. So I've known him for a very long time. He passed away last year. I've known him for almost 40 years. This is a book about living, and this is a book about what it is, or the role. So if you see a big furry thing right here, that's my cat. She likes to sit at the window while I'm talking. So please bear with him. So this is a book I would really recommend that all of you, if you can, get a copy. If you want me to send you a copy, sorry about that. If you want me to send you a copy, I have a PDF copy. Please send an email and I will send you a PDF copy. So this is Bernard Lowen. In 1961, he created the direct current defibrillator. And as you know, most of you know, because you're in a medical school, the direct current defibrillator is the AED, the automatic external defibrillator that's used in many instances, and a version of it is used for cardioversion in hospitals. So that's Bernard, and but he won the Nobel Prize for something entirely different. And this is something extremely important, especially has become important for all of us. So Bernard created the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW. And in 1985, he was awarded, or IPPNW was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace, because Bernard Lowen was extremely catalytic in getting President Reagan and President Gorbachev to sign the Nuclear SALT II Treaty. So he co-discovered or discovered the DC defibrillator, but he got the Nobel Prize for creating or bringing peace. And I think everybody can recognize the immense, profound significance of this, because we might be at the brink of a real nuclear war. And the other side of this cartoon, this slide shows you cartoons or photographs of defibrillators in phone boxes in UK. This is very near where my father-in-law lived, and my wife took these photographs while we were driving on the road back and forth from the house. And this is in Bernard's house many years ago with variety of people. The reason I show you this photograph is because you can't understand this by looking at the photograph, but for a person like him, he had absolutely no hubris. He had absolutely no sense of, I am something. And I know that because I am nothing. And he spent a lot of time talking to me over the years. So now I'm going to go back a little bit further than 30 years. I'm going to go back almost 50 years. And this is where I grew up, Calcutta, India. And this is Mother Teresa. And she used to bring dying people into the home she created. And there's a history about how and when this home was created. I'm very well aware of it. I have been a part of it in my childhood. But this is where people came to die. And this is a more modern photograph from somewhere I found on the Wikipedia or somewhere else. But this is a more modern photograph, same place, except the photograph is a colored photograph. And this is Pope John Paul II when he visited Mother Teresa in Calcutta in the dying, the house of the dying people. And this is Mother's house. I grew up a block behind it, so very much familiar with the house. And this is the last photograph I took when I was talking to her while I was visiting. I went to see her and I was talking to her. And the photograph on my right side of my screen, you can see that she's handing me a piece of paper. The reason I took the photograph of her handing me the piece of paper is because for 20 years that I knew her face to face, 19 years, let's say, I knew her face to face, she never ever asked me to come and pray with her. This was the first time, and as it happens was the last time, she says, come pray with me. This was in October 1996. As some of you may recall, if you're old enough, you'll recall that she passed away 1 week after Princess Diana's accident in Paris. And she passed away on 7th of September, 1997. So this was the last time I spoke with her and took that photograph. So dying and death is something I knew very well. As a child, I was a volunteer in multiple things to do with Mother Teresa in her house, the Mother House. And question now I ask is, when should I die? So I like this. If you have a chance, read this article. I like this article. And I think that Dr. Emmanuel here is right. It is really sometimes important to recognize that all the BS, I'm sure there is an equivalent for BS in German, so you can translate it in your mind, but all the BS we hear about living the rest, for 100 years and living longer, I don't know how credible those are. So this brings us to a time to live, and maybe some of you can recognize the photograph of Caitlin Carrico on the left, my screen on the left, and she is being credited for the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, mRNA vaccine. So, as some of you know, she was thrown out of Hungary when she was a young scientist. Her grants were taken away. She left with her family and came to the US. In the US at UPenn, she did not have a good time. But eventually she persevered, and her publication in 2005 is the real reason why today we have the mRNA vaccine. So the reason I want to point this out, this is public news, most of you know about this. The one reason I want to point this out is that when people have knowledge, and a lot of people, you know and I know, they have a certain degree of knowledge about things, should knowledge turn into something else? So this is happening, and I especially point this out because this is happening in your own backyard, BioNTech in Mainz. This is what saved the world. And Kathleen Carrico has been a part of BioNTech for a very long time, or since they created it, I think. So this saved the world, and she has a tremendous amount of knowledge of having saved billions of lives. But what happens with knowledge is that knowledge grows based on something. And what she did really goes back to fundamental transcription and translation. And The transcription and translation, the field of transcription and translation is an enormous field, but one of the very significant things that we understand today, that how genes are organized and how messenger RNA is created, is because of splicing. And that's Phil Sharp. I worked with him in his lab at MIT. So Phil won the Nobel Prize for discovering split genes. He's at MIT. And a tremendous number of work for which people are recognized, like this one with Phil, is due to women. So these are the two women. This is from our MIT archives. These are the two women, Susan Burgett and Claire Moore, who was responsible for the work that finally led to understanding of the organization of transcription and translation in our cells. There are quite a number of very famous people in this photograph. Many of the Nobel Prize winners, 2B Nobel Prize winners, they're in this photograph. This is from the mid-1980s at MIT. And if you're interested, Thomas will give you a PDF, and you can see there's a link to it. You can go and look at the link. But just to mention, the contribution of Susan Burgett and Claire Moore is nothing to trivialize compared to Caitlin Carrico and others. And Caitlin knows about it because she and we have discussed this. And what I want to point out about Caitlin Carrico is that when you have knowledge, perhaps it makes you humble, generous, and more dignified. And I know this again because here are two emails that between me and Caitlin Carrico, and I am a nobody. She is this very famous woman. And I just want to point out to you, if you look in the second email at the bottom, and if you see what she writes, if you can read it, you will see it says, "Dear Showman, thanks for your email. Considering the subject, I am a stupid old lady who is not an expert on the topic. This is dignity, an opulence of dignity." And this is, as you can see, the date and the time. It's after she has saved billions of people. She writes to me, who is a nobody, says, "I'm a stupid old lady." So this is, and it continues and whatever she's saying. But the point is, it is tremendously heartening that knowledge, true knowledge, not knowledge like Elon Musk, who's an absolute scumbag of the world, or Mark Zuckerberg, these scumbags who are robbing the world of all its potential. Real dignity doesn't need any advertisement, doesn't need you to go to space or Mars or anything. So before this SARS thing happened in our lives, there was an Ebola scare in the US in 2014. And this is our lab. So by the way, when Thomas and Dr. Borer introduced me as MIT, I am also part of Mass General Hospital. So this is the lab at Mass General, and President Obama had asked a lot of people to come up with ways we can deal with Ebola if it really did happen. So this is what we did in the lab at MGH, and there was an event with Dr. Goldman, who is the guy in the middle. If you can see, and you can see his photograph with me, so Julian presented this to the president when this happened. And one thing I want to take to the next slide is the ventilator. And this is where this technological perspective comes about. So if you want to know more nauseating details of some of these ventilator issues with regards to COVID-19, asked Thomas for a book chapter that Thomas and myself and others we just wrote. Thomas has a copy, he's a co-author. Thomas has a copy of the book chapter and he can send it to you. But the ventilator becomes a really important part of death and dying if things happen that you have to be assisted in order to breathe. So these are very common things. Most of you are MDs in the room, so I'm assuming you know these things. But this is where things become very tricky. These are the various types of ventilation. You have continuous mandatory ventilation, intermittent, continuous spontaneous ventilation. So there are various types of ventilation. And the question becomes, which type of ventilation do we need? And it is based on, obviously, on the patient data, the patient feedback, and the knowledge of the medical professionals. But believe it or not, there is a huge problem in these computer-assisted change in the settings in a ventilator. And what is the problem? The problem is some of these ventilators are connected to other systems, and they are connected to other systems, and they are connected to the internet. So ventilators have been hacked in case of cybersecurity, and they have turned up FiO2, that's a fraction of the oxygen in the gas mix, has been turned off or turned very high up, and then the patient is what is layman's term is called oxygen poisoning, and patients have died because of cybersecurity issues with ventilators where FiO2 concentration is so high that they die of oxygen poisoning. So this is a new dimension. This is a dimension. Our lab is also involved in cybersecurity of medical devices. So this is a new dimension, but it is really something that is going to affect us. How severely, I don't know, but it's going to affect us sooner or later, at least in the Western world, where things are connected to the internet. Okay, the other part of this story is about mass balance. I'm going into a little bit more details because there is something else that I'm going to follow up with where this detail becomes very relevant. So if you are a medical student, or you are a practicing medical person, you're an MD, you know that mass balance is the basic law or rule in terms of the exchange at the alveoli. So this balance for carbon dioxide leads to something called end-tidal carbon dioxide, EtCO2. And this EtCO2 is a very important determinant in PCA. And this is showing you a mock setup of a PCA. This is one of the things we study in the lab. In this PCA, if your oxygen saturation is depressed, if you have lowered respiratory rate, and if your end-tidal CO2 is high, these three things together is telling somebody that you are soon going to die. And why is this relevant? The reason it's relevant is because when you have post-operative patient-controlled analgesics introduced in a way such that the patient can control how much he or she wants to have morphine in the system, some patients are using that indiscriminately. They want it too much. But the problem is not about only about patients being indiscriminate because they're in a post-operative position and they are trying to get comfortable. They want to be less painful. But the thing is, and the thing what we have been looking at for a long time, is that oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, and EtCO2 are measured by 3 different devices. And these 3 different devices don't talk to each other. And because they don't talk to each other, because they're manufactured by 3 different companies and they don't want to share the data, this is an important issue when it comes to monitoring the whole patient rather than just a point of data. And this is why, if you look at the number of deaths in the US, there's somewhere between 200 to 400,000 deaths in the US due to medical mistakes. And this is one of the main reasons for medical mistakes is inoperability or lack of interoperability between data in medical devices. And if you look at that and put it in the scheme of things, the third most important reason of death in the US is going to have to be deaths due to medical error. So in terms of patient safety, in terms of medical ethics, this is a tremendously important point. At least in this country, everybody in the medical field is aware of it. The Congress, the Senate, they're all aware of it, but we have been working on this problem since 2004. And in the past 18 years, not much has really changed unless you consider the changes that have been made since COVID-19. So this pandemic actually brought about a significant overhaul of FDA in trying to figure out data interoperability, because without that, many more patients will die, especially in an emergency situation. So this number of deaths is like a jumbo jet 747 crashing every day. So another thing that is happening, and it's happening because nobody really knows about it, is silent ischemia. Silent ischemia, as you can see from this cartoon, 76% of silent ischemia is without any symptoms that people report. And we have known about things like BNP, troponin, C-reactive protein for about, I think BNP was discovered in 1988. So for 34 years, we have known about these biomarkers, but not much has happened in terms of using them to figure out the risk of these people, especially the people in the 76% silent ischemia group. So death and dying, this is an important part because congestive heart failure, myocardial infarction, these are the most common cases of cardiovascular diseases, which is the #1 killer in the world. So this is one type of thing that obviously is coming up these days. You can have some sort of a ECG or a cardiologist cardio scan on your phone. And this cartoon on the left-hand side of the thing with the colors red and blue, that's a simulation. And depending on where you are on the simulation, if you're in the bottom right-hand corner, you are okay. If you're in the bottom left-hand corner, you're dead. So this is something that perhaps could help, but only it will help the very, very affluent people, not the everyday people. And this is how, some of the things that are happening out of MIT. But these are very superficial. This is nothing that really addresses what's going to happen if you detect it. Detection is one part of the equation, but following up the detection to do something else is a second part of the equation. These are also very good things. You can print your own face. If you have parts of it missing, it can be printed. So this is a classic case, and I'm quite certain many of you may have seen this, a cartoon from photographs. But this did happen. This is not an artificial thing. So this did happen. And this face was printed, and the person was reconstructed from reconstructive surgery. So this brings us to opportunities for the underserved, and that is something I am interested in because you can easily see from my background. If I have seen when I was not even a teenager, I have seen death and dying in Mother Teresa's house and in the city of Calcutta. So how do we serve the underserved is an important question. And there are ways that we can do things, but I doubt much of it. I doubt if any of it will actually come out of the United States, because this is not a place where underserved is a good word. If it's not for money, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. So, but this is obviously very important, and there is some precedent that in some parts of the world this is happening at a better rate than it's happening in this country. I've given you some suggested readings, and I think that it's very important to mention, and this talk, or this very brief discussion that Thomas invited me to, is really something I've never done before, and I have never really taken the time to mention people that has been instrumental in my life. So I will take this time and mention people instrumental in my life. And so this is, you have seen an example already. So this is Annie Boots, and this is my family, my children and Rebecca. Rebecca is in the far left, and that's these are not digital twins. These are real twins, but it's Rebecca and my daughter, Emma and Rebecca. And that's our son, who's in the Navy, U.S. Navy. And that's us. And so this is one of our photographs from at MGH, Mass General, when I was there. And extreme left is Larry, and extreme right is Anne. And Larry is now the executive vice president of UPenn, where Kathleen Carico is, and Anne's now the CEO of all the Harvard hospitals. And that's at MIT in my room, and that's one of our retreats. And thank you. And this is what I'm hoping will happen. But again, it's a hope. So thank you for listening to me rambling on about unrelated things. But if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.